So we're just gonna give a few seconds for folks to virtually migrate into the Zoom space. I see the numbers going up. And I'm so pleased to have everyone here at our October session of the Gender Equity Education Series. We're gonna keep going on the theme of what can we learn from the COVID pandemic that we can use to grow and become better. And I'm so happy to have Leigh Holterman and Jim Hudziak here to talk to us about wellness. So even if your wellness wasn't directly affected by being a COVID patient, what can we learn about wellness and resilience and the ways we've been affected by the pandemic to move forward? So I'm really excited about this session. I'll also say that I often say that gender equity is not women's work, and it really does take the commitment and the action of a community in order to move the equity agenda forward. And creating a safe, just, and equitable world and workplace is hard work. And we know that we have an ally in our dean, Rick Page, who's here with us today. So I invite him to wave and say hi.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. This is Dr. Doherty's presentation, so I'll stay quiet.
Thanks, Dean Page. And one of the other things that I've realized over the last little bit is that while we've increased our attendance at these events by having them be virtual, none of you who are in the audience can see who else is here. So I can see every time who's here. I know the chairs that are here all the time. I know the deans that are here. I know your colleagues from your clinics that are here putting energy towards gender equity, but I realize that not everyone in the audience can see that. So in that light, I'm asking Dr. First, Chair of Pediatrics, to come and share with us why he's here and why he's been here on an ongoing basis and why he's interested in fostering gender equity. So I'll give you the floor, Dr. First.
Well, thanks, Dr. Doherty, for inviting me to say a few words to help kick off today's Gender Equity Education Series webinar, Too Stressed to De-Stress, Pathways to Wellbeing. As you pointed out, I've been sitting in on the majority of these webinars since they started, and there is no question to me that the well-being of women in academic medicine is so severely impacted if we can't all not just talk about gender equity, but take actions to walk it. And this has been so important on our department's journey, and I'll bet all departments' journey at the Larner College of Medicine to our wellness and well-being. And I would say my own personal journey to better understand what it means to be a male ally for gender equity. Now, I started, as I said, tuning in about a year ago to these monthly webinars, and I've tried to bring from these webinars back to our department, to our faculty, to our staff, to our trainees, what we discuss, and then take actions on particular topics that have come up. For example, among the things we're now doing to raise the awareness of gender equity as well as race, ethnicity, we ask that all speakers who give a CMIE talk in our department have to include at least one slide that focuses on issues of equity. And often these focus on gender equity. So it's not just a sidebar, but it's integrated in everything that we do. There are now new processes in place in our department with a true focus on equity in regard to replacing or finding people to fund leadership positions in our department. Funded leadership positions now have a process, and these positions all have term limits so that faculty, and I'm proud to say the majority of faculty in our department are women, who currently may not be holding leadership positions, get chances to apply for these positions in subsequent years, bringing us closer to equity and the gender balance of leadership in our department, and I hope across our college. Salary and promotion data, we now provide that and have been doing that for several years publicly to our entire faculty, and I'm pleased that we are close to, if not already, demonstrating gender equity in our salary and academic ranks in many critical areas in our department. So I could go on sharing steps that we're taking as a result of these monthly webinars, but I really hope that these steps for all of us create this improved sense of wellness and well-being in the department and in today's seminar, I'm sure we're going to focus on that particular sense of well-being. So I just want to thank you, Dr. Doherty, and the team that works with you for providing these monthly seminars and allowing me and so many others to learn so much from them each and every month. My own sense, as I said at the start, of well-being and wellness as a department chair is so much better off when we can together proactively take actions to promote gender equity. And that's what I found these webinars are all about. So I look forward to today's topic just as much as I do every month, and I'm going to turn it right back to you. Thanks for sharing a little bit about what we're doing in pediatrics as a result of these webinars. Back to you, Dr. Doherty.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. First. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. And for those of you who are in leadership or who are on faculty and looking towards leadership, now you know you have one more person who you can reach out to who's truly interested in this work. And I urge you to reach out to the allies you have in the community, and together we can build a more equitable, safe, and just environment. So now on to our main feature. I'm so happy to have both Leigh Holterman and Jim Hudziak here with us today. Dr. Leigh Holterman is the Director of Curricular Evaluation and Assessment at the Teaching Academy. She is an assistant professor of psychiatry, and we're so happy to have her on faculty with us. She's also a member of the Gender Equity Steering Committee and co-chair of the Education and Professional Development Working Group that helps to bring these sessions to you. Dr. Jim Hudziak, has a career that has centered on the development and the effect of wellness on our growth and development. He is the creator and director of the UVM Wellness Environment, the chief of child psychiatry, and the director of the Vermont Center for Children, Youth, and Families at the Larner College of Medicine. I'm so excited to dig into this topic. As a reminder for the audience, you can use the Q&A function for questions, and I will curate them throughout the session. We'll have time at the end to answer them. The session also is being recorded, and you'll be able to access it on the ODEI video library on our website, hopefully within a couple of days or a week of the session. And thank you so much for being here. I'm going to pass it off to Drs. Holterman and Hudziak.
Thank you, Anne. Welcome, everyone. Jim and I are thrilled to be here today. We're going to, over the course of the next hour, talk about just stress generally and the impacts of stress on our physiology and our well-being, as well as things that we've seen happen during COVID, particularly around stress and well-being, and then some evidence-based strategies for improving our well-being as well, and some data that we've been working on through the various programs that Anne mentioned, the Wellness Environment and WeMD, which you'll hear more about in a little bit. So next slide, please, Jim. Thank you. So I just wanted to start off by assuring everyone that we all experience stress. It is a universal phenomenon and everyone feels it. This goes from routine daily pressures to sudden negative changes in our lives, all the way up to severe traumatic events that some people experience. And stress isn't always a negative thing either. So we've found there's been a lot of research about the impacts of various levels of stress. And so you can think about it as a U-curve in the sense that sometimes a little bit of stress can be motivating and actually increase our performance to a point. At that point, when stress becomes too overwhelming, it can start to decrease our performance. So there is this sort of middle ground of how stress can actually, our stress responses particularly can help us. Where it starts to be problematic is when we're under chronic stress, because this can affect our health in numerous ways. It has effects on our immune responses, digestion, cardiovascular systems, our sleep. Oftentimes people experience headaches, and also impacts on mood. One of my research heroes, Dr. Robert Sapolsky, who is a professor of biological sciences and neuroendocrinology, wrote a book back in the 90s called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And this was a guide for people to start to understand the differences between human stress responses versus those in animals. And what they find is that animals tend to experience episodic stress. So you imagine a zebra, is in out in its grasslands, and it sees a lion and it freaks out and runs away. And then after that, its stress systems start to calm down. So they activate to get it out of this dangerous situation, but then it calms down. Unlike the zebra, we find that humans tend to experience more chronic stress, and also stressors that aren't really life and death situations, but our bodies don't necessarily know how to react differently to that. So since it's using the same systems, we treat a traffic jam the same way that a zebra treats the threat of getting eaten by a lion. And so this fight or flight response ends up causing chronic health problems in humans, such as ulcers or hypertension, or even decreased neurogenesis. The good news, though, is that there are accessible ways to manage stress, which we will talk about during this hour with you. And I will turn it over to Jim now to talk a little bit more in depth about the neurology behind stress.
Thanks, Leanne, and thanks everybody for including me today. It's a joy to work with my departmental colleague, Leanne, on this shared journey. I trained at WashU in St. Louis, Missouri in genetics, epigenetics, and neuroimaging, and my work over the last 30 years has been aimed at understanding the impact of stress and adversity on the structure and function of the human brain and the subsequent thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that emerge. Our goal in all the work I do in the Vermont Center for Children, Youth, and Families, helping children and families who are under chronic stress, and then applied to university students and now to medical professionals, is really aimed at an idea that we don't believe, nor do we try to coach you out of having stress in your life. We say stress is ubiquitous, it's everywhere, but what we should be doing in medicine is giving folks strategies to identify their stress and then learn better how to manage their stress. We like to say, hug your stress. So in this cartoon I use for my work, what Leanne just touched upon is when you experience stress, either acute or chronic, you're going to have the release of inflammatory cytokines, corticosteroids, disruptions of your neuroendocrine pathway that literally changes the structure and function of your brain and your neuroconnectivity. My work in neuroimaging shows the profound effect of adversity on your genome, on the structure and function of your brain, and then your thoughts, actions, and behavior, leading to things like depression, high-risk behaviors, substance use and abuse, impaired learning. And for a lot of folks, people have taken this as sort of inevitability, a death sentence, if you will. I've had a very stressful life. My brain has changed and I can't get out of it. But we pioneered that the Vermont Center for Children, Youth, and Families, now 30 years into this, is we sure as heck can do something about this. If you teeter the totter that bad things that happen to your genome, that happen to your brain, lead to bad outcomes, well, then there must be a series of good things that could happen to your genome, your brain, and lead to good outcomes. And we've published neuroimaging and genomic and epigenetic studies of all of these domains of how you respond to the fact that stress is not going away in your life, and how you can use these strategies in the moment to deal with acute stress and over time to manage chronic stress. And as you get to the end of this presentation, you'll see we're talking about a special group of people, healthcare professionals, who, when asked the question, who wants to expose themselves to chronic and often toxic stress for the rest of their lives, we all raised our hands. And so this is a new idea of doing proactive stress identification and management for healthcare professionals with special attention to the impact and the correlations by gender and by diversity. Leanne's going to tell you a little bit more about all this.
Thanks, Jim. So yes, I'm going to talk a little bit more about why we do what we do. So as Jim said, there obviously stress affects everyone, but we wanted to spend some time today talking about the effects of stress, particularly based on gender. So we'll focus on females and female identified members of our community to talk about the impacts of stress. And so what we have found when we look into gender differences within stress experiences, found that females are twice as likely as males to experience severe stress and anxiety. And this holds true across cultures, across geographic region, and across resource levels that are that these folks have accessibility to. So they have also found, the American Psychological Association does a study pretty regularly about the impacts of stress, and they found that female participants in that study are more likely to report stress than males overall, but particularly around things like financial concerns, terrorism, and family responsibilities. Next slide, please. And part of the reason that we start to see these differences is the circumstances in the lives of female and female identified people. So females typically take on more unpaid domestic work than males, somewhere around 3 times as much. And this goes hand in hand along with extra emotional labor. So females are often tasked with dealing with the management of their household in terms of their family's emotions, and then also often at work as well. And so this definitely goes unpaid, and it is stressful, even if there are benefits to that. The downside of this is that these things usually go unnoticed unless they're not done. So these are things that are sort of under the radar expectations that females will take care of. And when they don't get done, there's a negative reaction. But when they do, it's just kind of like, oh yeah, that's expected. And this really comes down to the socialized roles of female identifying individuals. And you will probably hear a lot of females talking about how they feel like they have to be superheroes. So there's this socialized phenomenon now where women in our society are seen as needing to do it all in order to be successful. We're supposed to be the perfect moms, the perfect workers, the perfect, just generally people all of the time. So you have to excel in all of these areas or else you feel like you're failing. And so this is, again, something socialized in our society right now. And this can absolutely create just this toxic stress. So, okay, next slide, please. A recent study that just came out from the AARP suggests that this is, these next couple slides are going to be specifically about things that have happened since COVID, because these circumstances were present well before the pandemic, but the pandemic exacerbated a lot of these issues. So we can see that from this AARP study, since 2020, 41% of women aged 40 to 65 lost some amount of job-based income during the pandemic. And this had the strongest impact on women of color. And when asked, 71% of respondents had indicated it would take anywhere from 1 to 5 years to recover from that job, that income loss, with 5% reporting that they feel they will never recover from the hit that they took during the pandemic. And the biggest reason that they reported having this impact was because of their caregiving responsibilities and how most typically it fell on the female identified person in the household, or to take care of children, to take care of parents or ailing relatives and things like that. So that really interfered with their ability to work. And again, this is all perfect storm for creating stressful situations. And then just recently, there was a study conducted by UMass Amherst, and it was a national study, but it did state by state analysis of the impacts of COVID-19. So they were able to provide a report to Vermont just about the results from our population. And so really similarly to the AARP study, again, we found that 79% of the respondents, who were overwhelmingly female, by the way, there was over 80% or close to 90% of the respondents were female identified. So they reported a loss of childcare or their kids having to be home from school led to a loss of productivity at work. Sometimes this led to losing their jobs, but overall they just couldn't manage to take care, like they couldn't take care of all of these requirements, and it was hugely stressful and really completely unequitable. So female respondents also, in addition to taking on more caregiving responsibilities, took on more housework and remote school than their male partners. So for those who had male partners, that was the typical trend. Interestingly, in households that had 2 female partners, the work was much more evenly divided. So maybe something to learn from that. And what they did also find was that anxiety and depression increased. So 25% of the respondents in this study had severe anxiety or a panic attack in the month previous to this study, and 1 in 3 reported severe anxiety and depression based on the scale that they used. What was interesting is that this was in an inverse relationship with income, and age. So those making less money experience higher levels of stress. And similarly, these impacts were worse in the younger demographics. So the nearly half of the participants from 18 to 24 reported these severe stress and anxiety. Additionally, substance use went up, with over 40% of people reporting an increase in alcohol and cannabis usage. Participants were asked to suggest what policies might help, and they suggested the stimulus payment, and then access to mental health care, support for childcare, and also, because Vermont is so rural and we don't have the greatest access to technology across the entire state, technological support was a higher request for Vermonters than in other states. And so we can see, looking at this just again creates this perfect storm for experiencing the negative impacts of stress. And so for females specifically, these are some of the impacts and effects that they feel from stress. So that would include insomnia, family conflict, again, anxiety, fatigue, and heart problems. And to speak a little bit about the heart problems, heart disease is the leading killer of both males and females. Oh, that's okay, Jim, you can leave it on the next slide. But it's less understood in females. And so essentially what they have found is that females who experience a heart attack are more likely to die within 1 year after that heart attack than males are. And then also physicians don't tend to speak to female patients about this as much as they do for their male patients, because it's just less known as a problem. And then also it's harder to recognize the symptoms because they're not always the classic heart attack symptoms that we think of. So not only are women experiencing these high levels of stress, and their physical impacts are less likely to go recognized and be able to be treated. So that's also an important consideration. So yes, also our responses to stress based on gender have been seen to be different. So most people are aware of the fight or flight phenomenon that helps us deal with stressors, or whether they're acute or chronic, our bodies rev up to be able to save us or help us take care of ourselves during a stressful time. It's a survival mechanism. They've also found another stress response called tend and befriend. And this is something where our systems, particularly around oxytocin and the corticoid systems, they focus more on affiliative responses to stress. So, okay, stress is happening, I'm going to get with my group and we're going to protect each other, and I'm going to make sure everyone's taken care of. And so, probably unsurprisingly, we found gender differences exist in this. So female identified people more often utilize this tend and befriend, probably because it is a mechanism to make sure that children are being cared for during times of danger. That's what they think, sort of biologically and historically, that's where that comes from. What happens is that this makes female identified people more vulnerable to effects of low social support. So we saw a lot of this, social distancing and disconnection from social networks during the pandemic. And so this, if your tendency is to react in this tend and befriend way, that could really lead to some negative outcomes on those people from not having their social networks. And then finally, I just want to take a moment to talk about underrepresented gender groups and stress. So they found that sexual and gender minorities face barriers to well-being at work, such as not having appropriate facilities, experiencing exclusion and harassment, and also the stress from just identity concealment if it's not something that they're able to share at work. And therefore, these groups tend to experience higher rates of depression and anxiety, on top of with the discrimination and victimization, more so than cisgender and heterosexual individuals. And this is typically a problem that is even worse in rural and small town environments, such as many areas of Vermont, because protective factors against the negative effects of stress as a result of these issues is social support and having pride in one's gender identity or connectedness to others with similar identities. And those things are not as easily accessible in these more rural and small places. So I'm going to turn it over to Jen to talk about what exactly we're doing to address some of these doom and gloom slides we just talked about.
Thanks, Leanne. We're going to switch now after you beautifully setting the stage about not only stress and the toll stress takes on all human beings, but specifically on gender and underrepresented gender and diverse community members. So what I'm going to do is talk to you a little bit about this broad idea of building healthy brains. We've devoted our center's work for the past 30 years to debunk and demystify the misconceptions that some of us are sad and others are not. All of us are a little bit sad and anxious, inattentive, quirky, naughty, and stress brings out more of that than not. So we started this work 30 years ago, testing these models in little children. And I'm going to end today encouraging you all to please go visit our Center for Children, Youth, and Families and learn about our deep commitment as allies to underrepresented gender and diverse populations. But more to the point, I'm going to talk a lot about how you can build healthy brains through music, mindfulness and breath practices, social relations, exercise, sleep, reading, nutrition. If you go to this site, which we'll give you, you can actually get prescriptions as well as individual education from members of my team aimed at showing you that what we published is the impact of mindfulness on the structure and function of your brain, your ability to manage stress, exercise, and sleep, etc. In fact, 9 other choices. If you go to our website, you'll learn about domains of wellness, and you can click on any of these bubbles and learn to develop your own practices. Now, why am I starting where I'm going to end? I want to just show you that we've been doing this now for 30 years with children and families with identified severe emotional behavioral problems, then partnered with Lewis and the pediatric group and did it in child visits in the pediatric department and showed that we actually improved the health and well-being of fathers and mothers, but specifically more dramatic improvements in mothers who we did these things, even though they said, I'm just here to get my kid a vaccination. So I want you to know that this empirical work exists and you can find it in our CVs. I then, after 30 years of that, said, why don't I take it out of the clinic and apply it to this very high-risk group of students called college students, created the UVM-WE program and built in all those same prescriptions for wellness in an incentivized-based, neuroscience-inspired way, which basically said to college students, how would you like to build a healthy brain? We'll show you the way. And the prescriptions are all aimed at identifying and managing stress. This has caught on around the country. We put thousands of students through the UVM-WE program with remarkable changes in substance use outcomes, conduct outcomes, assaults, and other things that were important to all of us, but also improved GPAs and school retention. And working with your leadership, particularly Dean Page and Krista Zale and others, and more recently with Leigh Rosen and Leanne, we said, why don't we take this to the medical students, a group of self-selected individuals who said, I am going to endure for the next 4 to 10 years of my life almost unmanageable stress, and I'm going to do it by choice. So the WE experience is extended to medical students. I use an incentivized-based approach, built an app for the medical students, which I'll show you about in a little bit. And it's the ability to, while you're training to become a healthcare professional, what if you committed to self-care? So the central theme is to promote wellness in behaviors in physician trainees who often forfeit their well-being in this almost Stockholm syndrome belief that I'm supposed to suffer this much in order to be a healthcare professional. This work that we've done will improve your memory, your focus, your empathy, your decision-making, your creativity, your problem-solving, your efficiency, your patience, and your academic performance, all of which would seem to be critical skills for a physician, regardless of his, her, or their journey. So the aims of this program, which I'm going to share you data from because we're in the middle of it, is to understand behavior change in medical student trainees as it correlates to the special stress that they're enduring, and then pay special attention to correlates on gender and diversity. And Leanne's going to come back to that and show you some of the early data that we've looked at in that way. Determine whether we can engage young physician trainees to actually take care of themselves through an incentivized-based contingency management approach, and whether that will reduce their reporting of the tolerance of stress and burnout in their lives. So we do 3 times a year surveys with our students, and then they're given a nightly checklist on their app. And they're given a Apple Watch where we do heart rate variability, actigraphy, and sleep measurements. And on this app, we created a personalized medical record. Each day they rate their calm, how much they worked out, their focus, their mood, and their sleep. And then when they can touch any of these bars and they can start to correlate across days, months, and years. On the days I exercise, how well is my mood? On the days that I sleep well, how good is my mood? How well am I managing my anxiety? I then built an artificial intelligence machine-based learning coach that creates an N of 1 coaching experience that says, well, Jim, on those days you don't exercise, your mood is really low. Maybe, I don't know, you should go out and take a walk. On the app, then, we built over 100 personalized breathing, yoga, fitness, and coaching strategies in the app that each time a medical student goes and listens to one of these, he, she, or they actually earn something we call WeMD coin. That WeMD coin, as you'll see, goes into a WeMD bank, and they can take it to the WeMD store and buy WeMD stuff. At the same time, we try to connect everybody to their community using the calendar and letting them know on the app all the health promotion stuff that's happening in real time in the Larner College of Medicine. They then get their daily survey. They use a slider bar to say how stressed out or anxious they were today, how depressed, how much they exercised. They'll get these coaching moments when you see that someone who's not sleeping well and isn't getting exercise has a low mood. The AI coach says, let's go out and get 30 minutes of exercise because it will boost the length and quality of your sleep. Then said, did you do it? And did it help? And that goes into the machine learning environment to tell you and no one else how your life is going. And now you can see blow-ups where you can start to see what's the relationship between my wellness scores and my exercise, and start to craft your own personalized well-being journey. You earn the WeCoin for everything you do in the app. It goes in the WeBank, and your WeMD money can then be yours to buy things like Skeeta and Burton Gear and Vermont Flannel, all in this idea to use incentivized-based behavioral change to reward people just to do some kind things for themselves. When you join up, you get some Gitch, as my young people tell me this stuff is called, but you get a WeMD mask, you get an Apple Watch, get some customized WeMD Larner College of Medicine hats. Why do we make that stuff? Because we want our community to celebrate that it's cool to work on your well-being, that it's cool to meditate, that it's cool to do yoga, that it's cool to breathe in the moment of stress. So here's some WeMD data from your students. We already have 159 students signed up over the first 2 years, a stunning uptick in participation. We're getting nightly surveys, almost always from at least 100 of these students. The recent data I'm showing, this is from September 26, when we only had 115 folks signed up. And here's where you start to see, this is the well-being score for the last 2 weeks for the entire Larner community. And you would, in a general population score, you want to be about 60 to 70 or above to consider yourself saying that I had a good day. And you can see we have a number of medical students who are having a good day, but an equal number who are saying they're not. Same thing with mood. You see this slightly kurtotic Gaussian distribution of mood, where this would be a normal mood, this is sad, and below, this is happy. So you're seeing a distribution of medical students who on a nightly level are saying, yeah, I had a great day, or some I'm having really bad days. Interesting about the ascertainment bias of students who go into medical school. Look at everybody's anxious when they come to the University of Larner College of Medicine. And you can start to think about phenotypes that we reward to become medical students: highly obsessional, highly anxious, highly goal-directed, and living in a meritocracy. But it still doesn't mean it's good to experience stress and anxiety the way that our students are. Your focus data is skewed towards positive scores. 40 or 50 or above is probably good. But this is a way, remember, you get your own individualized report. We wouldn't know that Jim wasn't paying attention very well. But Jim, when he looks at his own, can tell. Jim could start saying, I'm trying to be a doctor, and my big problem is I have very low focus. What can I do to improve? Only half of our students are exercising every day, possibly the best stress reduction treatment that there is. About half of our students are eating well, calling into mind this gut-brain axis. Very few, relatively, are actually taking advantage of the important thing of being fully hydrated. This is just setting a goal of 6 8-ounce glasses of water a day. And you can see it's very rare. And this has all kinds of implications in neural network, attentional executive processing. This is social interactions. 6 and 7 would be where general population normative level is. And we would hope that creating a caring, thoughtful community would skew our students towards having positive social interactions. And here's their own reports of intentional kindness. I've personally told them that the practice of medicine is an act of intentional kindness. They should all be scored up here because just walking into a patient's room is an act of kindness. But more importantly, the students themselves don't see them engaged in acts of kindness. They're not sleeping well, 5 to 6, 7 hours a night, which in itself is a major issue. And they're saying that their sleep for some is quite restful, for an equal number is not restful. I'm going to jump for time because of the special notion of this talk. We now have 2,500 students through our undergraduate program. We looked at the impact of COVID on their lives because we did it last year, right in between the time that the quarantine occurred. Here's pre-COVID quarantine. This is mood. This is wellness index. This is stress. And you can see before COVID hit, higher moods, higher wellness, lower stress. COVID hit, stress went up, mood and well-being went down. Interestingly enough, the students who were in the wellness program versus our college as usual cohort, the students in the wellness program benefited in their ability to handle their anxiety problems, their inattention problems, and their misbehavior when compared and contrast to people who were not engaged in well-being. Just out there to provide you with a bit of evidence. This is using Apple Watch data. COVID hit, steps in males and females dropped precipitously. When those steps as measured by a biosensor went down, you had mood problems, mindfulness problems, way more time on your phone, less hydration, poorer meal, poorer sleep, and nutritional quality, all related to a simple thing called exercise. Leanne's going to talk real quickly about just our attempt to mash some data on the central questions today, and then we're going to give you 3 pointers to take home and then have some time for discussion.
Thank you. So we wanted to look at the data that we had so far for the WeMD. So it's a very preliminary analysis. So we were looking at pronoun differences in the well-being measures that Jim went through before. So I ran t-tests based on pronoun on all of these well-being measures, and I'm going to highlight a couple of the findings. And I will say that due to small n's, we were only able to do the binary analysis of female versus male pronouns. So what we did find was that female identified students had a marginally significantly higher level of anxiety and stress than male identified students. And so this mirrors a little bit of what we were seeing earlier with the reports of differences in gender and the experiences of stress in the general population. And that, and I believe this will continue to grow most likely as we get more and more reports throughout the year. And then an additional finding that is interesting, though we still definitely have to explore this, is that female identified students had a significantly lower level of hydration than male identified students. So I'm not quite sure yet what to make of that, but it is interesting for sure. And so moving forward, we have a lot of options as we get more data and get to look at different ways of looking at it. So future analytic work will include longitudinal person-centered analyses as opposed to the mean-centered analyses that I was looking at before, to examine the trajectories over time in health behaviors, and especially for certain groups. So we might use things like latent class analysis and factor analysis to identify types and different subgroups within these groups of how the different correlates all work together to predict our outcomes. And we also might look at mixed effects models, regression, moderation, and mediation models to determine, again, how certain health and stress variables predict one another.
Thank you, Leanne. And we'll be able to do that in a person-centered way. All these data are anonymously collected, but the individual gets his, her, or their own health report and can use this to generate their own person-centered data. So we wanted to end with 4 things you can do right now that are free and carry with them the most profound data in the studies of epigenetics, genetics, and neuroplasticity to better manage your stress. None of this is trivial. It may sound trivial. Walk 7 days a week. Don't do it 3 days a week. Don't do it 4 days a week. And yes, if you do high intensity training or yoga or something, that could count for your walk. But if you do 7 days a week, think of yourself as a healthcare professional prescribing a prescription. You would never say, take it when it's not rainy or take it when you feel like it. You take the medicine every day. This is the best medicine we know for reduction of anxiety and sadness. My own work shows it builds your hippocampus, reduces your anxiety and depressive symptoms 7 days a week. 2, develop a breathing program. Literally learn to box breathe. Literally learn to anticipatory breathe about things that will cause stress in your life. We like to say, quiet your brain. So you can use apps. One that I like to use is Stop, Breathe, and Think. A very simple app you can download just to teach you how to breathe. We don't expect everybody to go into meditation or mindfulness or even yoga, but you can learn to manage your breath and profoundly impact your ability to deal with stress. Again, in my own work, you'll quiet your default mode network. You'll tell that amygdala of yours to be quiet, and you'll open up your executive processing or the frontal parietal network, which will allow you to perform better, both in your relationships at work. Commit to your sleep. It's our secret sauce. It forgives our brain. It detoxifies us from the day. Yet the single most important thing we do in terms of preparing our day, our brain for the next day's stress, is sleep. So please visit Matt Walker's 6 tips for better sleep. Again, all 6 of them you could start tonight and will have a profound effect on your brain health. It'll help cortically organize your ventral medial prefrontal cortex, which is the home of attention, concentration, happiness, and mood. And lastly, if you want, go to our website, see the Vermont Center for Children, Youth, and Families. I gave you a hint of that at the beginning of this talk, so you can download all these exercises. You can also go to our UVM-WE website and read the many papers we published on this work, but also access, if you want, specific yoga mindfulness exercises as well. More than anything, what Leanne and I want is for folks to really, really understand that self-care is the journey to becoming a great healthcare professional. And hopefully you guys can use some of this to take care of yourselves. Thank you.
I just wanted to add on to that just real quickly. Part of the reason that we're bringing this to you and the topic of our talk, too stressed to de-stress, is just to wrap it up. I think it gets to be overwhelming when we're bombarded with different messages of how we have to take care of ourselves and yet be perfect at all these other things. And you can see from the pillars that Jim just talked about, these are not hugely big or involved activities. Taking a walk, learning to breathe, prioritizing sleep, albeit that is sometimes challenging for many of us. These are things that are accessible. You don't need gym memberships. You don't need a ton of different equipment or anything like that to start to take some of these steps. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Leanne and Jim, for this great presentation. I always love when there are concrete things to do at the end. That was one of my notes here. What can we do concretely? So thank you for giving us that. We do have some questions, and I would encourage everyone to put questions in the chat. We'll get through as many of them as we can. One concrete question is, so you talk about walking 7 days a week. How much? How long? What are we talking about here? If I just walk around my house or take the stairs, does that count?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it has to be sustained exercise of 35 minutes or more. Another faculty member at UVM, Jeremy Seibold, and I showed in transitional age kids, 13,000 young people we studied, if we could get them to do this 5 days a week, was a 23% reduction in suicidal ideation, depressive symptoms. 7 days a week, 36% reduction. And it's not hard, but you need to do at least 35 minutes.
Right. Another question is, have you seen, and I think we talked about this a little bit at the beginning when we were in our virtual green room, have you seen any negative impacts from all the data tracking on the participants themselves, as in tracking one's patterns or weight, for example, might have the potential to increase anxiety or a sense of failure that they're not meeting their goals?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, Leanne. I'll take it just because we've now done 7 years of this in UVM-WE. We don't ever ask about weight or body image purposely. We've spent a lot of time by combining what we think the best psychologists and psychiatry research of not trying to cause people pain in the service of causing them peace. And so, no, we haven't had problems with that at all. There's always anticipatory ideas like, are you going to tell us how to eat in a specific way? No, we tell you what we know, and we don't actually judge your body image, or body weight. So luckily, no, we haven't experienced that at all.
So there's a question from Tim Leahy. Given how strongly home gender equity affects career gender equity, are there ways we at work can support stronger advocacy for gender equity at home? I don't know if either of you have thoughts on that. I do have some thoughts on that, but I'll give you the first take.
I'll pass to Leanne first, but as the director of my center, we've done a lot of work in this area, so I could actually share there, but I'd rather hear more from you and Leanne.
I would like to pass to Anne in a minute, but I think that this is something that is a culture change, and it's not just necessarily about having gender equity at home and at work. It's that giving space for everyone to have a balance within their different responsibilities, and having that flexibility to take care of the things that are important in their lives. And so maybe at work, I'm not sure, maybe Anne, you could talk about what you think at work we could do to help support gender equity at home as well, or any of other ideas you have, but I think it comes down to a balance.
Yeah, I think I would second what you said, Leanne, about culture change. And one of the things that I've noticed and that's been studied is that in countries where the political structures, for example, have greater gender equity, when you look at the home life, there's greater gender equity there as well. And so I think the one influences the other. And so I think that the work environment can help to increase equity at home by supporting flexible schedules and childcare and sick childcare, so that the home doesn't have to take away from work. Work can actually support home. And then I think you can also have the equity at home and sort of the equal balance between, if you're in a two-parent family, two parents taking care of the household in an equitable fashion in order to allow both parents to be at work and fully be present. I'm not sure if that answers all the question, and I think it's a much larger discussion that we should continue to have, though.
If I could just jump in on Tim's follow-up. I'm a professor in the Netherlands, and I have a large study called Generation R there, where gender equity at home and gender equity at work is part of their cultural standard, as I think Anne was just talking about. And so we have a study of 10,000 families, of which 2,500 of those families, him is the primary caregiver. So we have Tim actually use that as a wellness measure, and we actually find no variation between the two types of families in an environment where gender equity is rewarded.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, lots of questions here. Another concrete one. What is the basis of your water intake recommendation coming from your friendly nephrologist?
Yeah, I'm sure Dr. Chung could tell you that no one knows the perfect answer. And what we found with many of our undergrads, and certainly many of our patients, is that they were essentially suffering from dehydration syndromes, not even relatively stable hydration. So we use something called the CNC program. It's called Clear and Copious. I don't mean to be overly graphic, but you're healthcare professionals. We try to get all of our participants to drink as much fluid so that they are peeing often and they're peeing clear. And for some people, that might be 5-8 ounces glasses a day. Others, it might be 8. And then we ask them to consider that their sweet spot, and then kind of sit in that sweet spot.
This one has to do with some of the data that Leanne had presented. And the question is wondering about self-reported barriers versus witnessed barriers. And the bottom line of the question is that men in our country are socialized to not necessarily report concerns or stressors. So how do we know that our gendered data on barriers and stressors is truly representative? There's a lot in that question.
There's a lot in that question. I'll take that one. I think that's a fantastic highlight of the difficulties when we're using just self-report data, because whatever each and every person is going to have some sort of either socialization or some sort of other characteristic that might make it either harder or easier for them to report certain stressors. And so, yes, I think the answer is just a confirmation that yes, that is a challenge, especially when we use survey data. And to the best of our abilities, researchers are always look to other observational measures or other ways to get at that same thing, where we're not relying on a person who experiences their own biases around reporting their experiences to just have that answer. So any time that we can get away from self-report and do more experimental data or other sorts of things like that, the better, for sure, in terms of that more, accurate or at least a different perspective on what might be going on. Because sometimes people's own biases or perspectives of what's going on is actually what we want to know as well. So definitely a highlight of the nuances of research methods.
And also adding in to the level of sophistication is why we build in biosensors, why everyone has Apple Watches on right now. It doesn't talk to the sophistication that Leanne and Anne might mention, but it helps us see deltas or degree of difference across large populations. And in both settings, we have almost 2x the number of participants who use the she, her pronoun than the he, him pronoun. So we also have power to do some sophisticated statistics to see if we're tapping those kinds of biases.
I have a question. One of the groups that have the highest stress and have been impacted the most by something like the COVID-19 pandemic tend to be those who are the most underserved. And I think about women of color, just to give one example of an underserved group who's been highly impacted. So how do we take programs like WE and bring them to groups like that in a sustainable way? Obviously, you're involved on a research platform, but how do we logistically bring this sort of really essential work to communities who could really benefit from it?
I love the question, and our center, the Vermont Center for Children, Youth, and Families, deeply cares about that question. We did a community-wide survey about systemic obstacles to accepting and getting care in our clinic, and there were no obstacles. So then we did a second survey that said, why don't you come to our clinic? They said, we don't want to. And I thought that was beautiful. So I just opened up the Vermont Family-Based Approach program in the Janet Mund Family Room, where we're delivering the Vermont Family-Based Approach, the WE program, the WE MD program, to new American families. We've enrolled 20 new American families, 14 of whom are expectant mothers, and they're getting the full deal. They get health promotion, illness prevention with culturally cued family wellness coaching. So we meet them where the families live, and we learn from them what would be the best way to promote this kind of health. And right now we have 15 undergrads working there, pretty much rotating through with families to provide sports, music, breathing, big brothers and big sisters to the kids. So I can't tell you it's going to work, but we're doing it. And my answer would be, don't act like there's not obstacles just because you can't find evidence for obstacles. Those obstacles are there. And the best solution is to bring this to the families, not wait for the families to come to you.
And I wonder also about asking the families that you're trying to reach, how applicable are the methods that you're using to their particular circumstance? So without I've done that it's translated cross-culturally.
I'm really enthusiastic to answer this. So I've done it with the Inuit population in Alaska. I've done it with first American populations in South Dakota. And the whole thing starts first with a redefinition of all of our programs to fit in a culturally appropriate setting. So I think we're on top of that. Again, I don't know if we're going to hit the sweet spot because, as you said, we're a research center.
Great. I love the intention and I love the work. One last question, or a couple of questions, but they're combined. Could this program be expanded to include residents in training in the hospital? And is there any plan for developing a WeMD program for faculty?
Yeah, and let's add to it graduate students. Our entire nursing teammates, particularly, should be benefited with this. And our dean is a huge champion of this. I do feel like I was duty bound, or we're duty bound, to do this beta test in the first 200 students to make sure we're not offering something for which there's not evidence of its efficacy. But I'm pretty sure that if you talk to Dean Page, he would say that I've already asked this multiple times, and I agree. But let's make sure it's something good before we, proffer it to others.
Right. Well, sign me up. I'll be first on your list. So I think we'll wrap it up there. I'm so again thankful to Drs. Holterman and Hudziak for being with us today, for sharing their experience, for giving us some concrete tools we can use to move forward and to increase our wellness. I also want to thank all the participants for joining. This was the best attended gender equity education series that we've ever had. We had over 100 people here, and I can give you some stats. There were 5 chairs of departments, 2 deans, many people I know who are genuinely interested in gender equity from across our institution. There were a couple of leaders from the main campus university. So we're really happy to have this sort of programming reach out and particularly reach into leadership and bring leadership into the discussion. Special thanks also, of course, to the Education and Professional Development Working Group that Leigh Holterman and Joe Conant co-chair. Also, always thank you to Tiffany Delaney and Tammy Candido, our Director and Administrative Coordinator from the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. If you see them walking around the hallways, please give them a high five or an elbow tap. ComAV rocks the house. We love you, Bruce. Our next event is November 1st. It's a panel discussion of local women leaders discussing what they learned through the COVID-19 pandemic. So we have our provost, Patty Prelock, Bev Colston from the Mosaic Center on main campus, and Isabel Desjardins, our CMO at UVMMC. This will be moderated by one of our deans, Jill Jemison. And again, don't forget to reach out if you're interested in gender equity. If you have suggestions for topics you'd like to see covered, if you have thoughts or questions, please email me or email any of the Gender Equity Steering Committee members. And now you know you've got Louis first. Louis, just open up your email box, send him questions and concerns. Dean Page is also happy to answer questions. I'll volunteer him as well. Thank you so much. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you on November 1st.